Hello and welcome to Connect and Collaborate. I am Alex Hopkins, your on-air producer, and today and all week long we have been talking aerospace because Monday was Aerospace Day at the Capitol. Yesterday we had our Citizens for Space Exploration event, and today we have with us Tom Bugnitz from Manufacturer's Edge. Tom, you've been on the show a few times. It's been a while since we've had you, but we're excited to have you back. How are you today?
I'm good. It's always great to be here. You guys are great.
Yeah.
This is so fun.
Oh, I'm so glad that you feel this way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, you have a guest with you. Would you like to introduce your guest?
I will introduce her. And if somebody who is a key part of our team can be considered a guest, I'll say guest, yeah. Jennifer Kurtz is our cybersecurity expert. And I can't even remember what our title is for you.
Cyber Program Director.
Cyber Program Director.
Yep.
And Jennifer's been with us like all of about a month.
Right, exactly.
Well, happy anniversary.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're
very
welcome.
much.
And we've added Jennifer, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, because cybersecurity, particularly in Defense Department and aerospace companies, is not just a huge thing, it's a requirement to stay in business these days. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later.
Fantastic.
So that's why we have Jennifer here.
Oh, wonderful. Well, and the main reason that we've got you here is to talk aerospace, right? Mm-hmm. Because it's Aerospace Week. There's been several events throughout the week. I know today is CU Boulder's third summit, right? So you've been enjoying all week long, yes?
Well, absolutely. The Aerospace Day at the Capitol is always a highlight. You know, that's an all-day thing. CSBR and CSE, Citizens for Space Exploration, and Colorado Space Business Roundtable have really taken that from never was a small event,
right?
But they've made it huge in the Capitol. You know, and Diane DeMeff, who you've never met, but who I say go hello to every evening when I go home, had one of the innovations there where she brought a student in an astronaut suit. And so that has gotten to be one of the big things. Is the student walking around with the legislators and showing up on the floor of the House and that kind of thing. So it's just a whole bunch of fun events. The drone thing was a good thing this year. So yeah, we look forward to it every year, and it's something we sponsor, and we feel very strongly about it as one of the things to create outreach, but also awareness within the public and our state government of the importance of aerospace in Colorado.
Fantastic. Well, and speaking of supporting this from Manufacturer's Edge, how about we get a little bit of background on you, Tom? It's been a while since you've been here. Give us your overview. Tell us where you started, why you're in Manufacturer's Edge, and why aerospace.
You know, I normally wouldn't do this. I'm gonna go all the way back to the beginning.
I love it. I'm ready.
I graduated from University of St. Louis, Washington U.
Okay.
And my first job was in Kenosha, Wisconsin, at the American Motors manufacturing plant. And you're too young to remember American Motors. But if you remember Wayne's World.
I do remember Wayne's World.
Their car was a Pacer.
Oh.
That Pacer was built by American Motors.
Oh.
And I walked down the line as that first Pacer came through the assembly line. So
that is awesome.
I was just a kid out of college, but that was my introduction to manufacturing, was working in an auto plant. And so over the years, a lot of different things, but have and Summer Sorensen, who you know and is my right-hand person, hates when I say this, but I say, well, at the end of my career, you know, but it's a great job I have now running Manufacturer's Edge. We're a nonprofit, and we're part of a federal program called the Manufacturing Extension Partnership Program, and we're the center for Colorado, the Manufacturing Extension Partnership Center. It's funded by the Department of Commerce through NIST, and many people will know NIST either by knowing the lab in Boulder or by the fact that they are the atomic clock that everybody looks to, including everything you think of goes to Boulder to get that signal.
Now, hasn't that clock moved up a little bit in the last couple of years?
No, that's the atomic scientist clock on when we're all going to die in a nuclear war.
Okay. My mistake there.
But what has happened to that clock, interestingly, is that through some just amazing, ungodly, smart stuff and people up there, I think the current accuracy, and I wish I had this on the tip of my tongue, is something like 3 seconds in 15 billion years.
Wow.
It's something just absurd. And I don't think I'm too far off.
Yeah.
It's really just an amazingly accurate thing. So that's our mothership is NIST. And so Manufacturer's Edge is one of 51 around the country.
Okay.
One in each state and Puerto Rico. And the job they give us is grow manufacturing in your state. And so we both focus on the state, what do we do to grow manufacturing, but we're part of a national network that we all cooperate. Cybersecurity be one of those areas we'll talk about a little later today, where we're part of a 6-state project that's pulling together everything we know about cybersecurity in the network and adding the NIST things to it. And so we're really a large network, and I can grab resources from any state to do things in Colorado, and vice versa. We go to other states to help as well.
That's awesome. So it's national.
Totally national.
Totally national. That's I don't think I realized that. As many times as you've been here, that's the one thing I've missed out on.
Yeah, there's as scary as it sounds, there's one of me in every state.
It's a little intimidating.
Well, that's one of the words you might use. Yeah. But I know pretty much all of the directors, all the people who have my job around the country, and it's unique in the sense that it's one of those mission-oriented organizations, and everybody is just focused, on helping manufacturing, looking at it as not helping a company, but helping people who have families, and we're creating jobs in manufacturing for that. So it really is a refreshing organization, particularly for a government-funded kind of thing. A couple of small statistics is that last year the MEP system, and we track this on a quarterly basis, and we all get evaluated. As a whole, we helped create or save 100,000 jobs. That was the first year we were over 100,000 jobs.
Fantastic!
And,
congratulations.
And as I always say, that's 100,000 families where people aren't worried about where mom's going to go to work or where are we going to go to school or whatever. And the second number, which came out of a study by the Upjohn Institute, is that those jobs contributed back to the U.S. Treasury somewhere over $1 billion.
Wow.
And so the program nationally costs $130 million, and we gave back $1 billion+ to the Treasury. So that's about a 9-to-1 payback. So for a government program, that's pretty impressive.
That is incredibly impressive for a government program.
Yeah. So I think Jennifer shares kind of our mission and our vision of that, and it's just a fun job. It's a fun place to work because of all the people we see. And you're in Colorado, which is the number 2 aerospace state that a lot of people don't realize. So we've actually had somebody in here on the show who has made a part that is either on or circling every planet.
Wow.
Okay. As an example, those are the kind of people we get to work with. Manned spaceflight comes through Colorado now.
Yeah.
Between United Launch Alliance, Lockheed Martin, Sierra Nevada Corporation, manned spaceflight is here. So it's really exciting to have our jobs and then just to be able to be part of all of that.
Oh, fantastic. The aerospace industry and defense industry is huge here, and I'm sure manufacturing plays a pivotal role.
Well, it's interesting. There's, Jay Lindell, who is got the greatest job title in the state, this aerospace and defense champion.
Yeah. I asked him actually when he was here if he was looking for an assistant champion.
Yeah, assistant, deputy. It'd be deputy champion.
Deputy champion.
Yeah.
I like that title better.
Yeah.
He was not,
Yeah,
though.
no,
so
he's not.
here I am.
Well, his statistics are, almost 500 companies associated with aerospace in Colorado. A lot of those are manufacturers. But the other statistic is about 80% of those are less than 10 people.
Wow.
Yeah. So you've got Lockheed, you've got Grumman, you've got Sierra Nevada, all the ones we mentioned who are big companies.
Right.
But the supply chain for building things like satellites and airplanes and the Orion space capsule is made up of, hundreds and thousands of very small companies. The company I talked about with the part on every planet, they also make a part for the F-35. They're the only ones in the world know how to make it.
Oh, wow.
The Air Force has tried to find somebody. They can't find them. Well, they're a 13-person firm, woman-owned firm.
Wow.
That's a key part of the supply chain for aerospace, and a lot of companies are like that. Oakman Systems, very similar. I could go down the line of all these companies who, and a lot of them don't think of themselves as aerospace, but when you look at the products they're putting out, you're part of the aerospace chain, guys. You're doing really well. People like the ones we're talking about, they're all part of it. And as we're going to talk about later, that's what makes cybersecurity so unbelievably critical right now for Colorado and for the country.
Absolutely. Well, and I think one of the things, and we talk about it a lot on the show, manufacturing has that kind of negative connotation still, right?
Yeah.
And so which is sad. It shouldn't. These are great jobs. Literally, you can go to work and make something that could land on Mars one day and be a part of the future of the colony of Mars. I plan to live there one day. That's my goal in life. I would love to live on Mars. I think that'd be fantastic. But to attest to what you're saying, there are these small companies, right? And they would probably never think to put aerospace on their resumes.
Right.
Yeah. So I know that you go and you help these small companies and get them put on the, not necessarily put on the map, but help them grow their business.
Right.
Is that?
Well, it's a lot of different things. One thing is how do you manufacture more efficiently? That's, you can only get so efficient. And like the company we're talking about with the F-35s, we put them in a program with the Air Force to determine whether they could improve and how much they could improve their production to reduce the cost. And they came back and basically said, no, you're doing about as good as you can possibly do right now.
Yeah.
I mean, those are the kind of things we like to see. But we worry about cybersecurity. We worry about marketing. We worry about the people in the companies. We've got a new program called Organizational Excellence, which is specifically to get companies to focus on how do I define these jobs? How do I find the people? How do I reward them? Mm-hmm. The whole thing about the person who's normally over like an engineering department was the best engineer. May not be the best manager.
Right.
Okay. How do we make sure that happens? Because we can put all these processes in place, which we always do, but until we get the people lined up for them, and again, I hate to keep referencing this, but we'll hear this in cybersecurity, until we get the people paying attention, none of the stuff makes a difference. So at its heart, what we do is all about getting people to perform better.
Absolutely. Well, and actually, when Summer was on the show with us, she brought the gentleman who was in charge of those programs,
Shane.
right? Shane, thank you.
Yeah.
And so, one of the neat things that I learned that day is that every person has their job, right? And if you're not communicating with each other, you're not getting the whole job done.
Right.
Yeah, and so where they come in is they talk to people and you're like, yes, we have the engineers that build things, and we have, we have the engineers that draw and have the ideas,
Right.
and then we have our workers that build the things, and they're not communicating together, right? And that's a key.
Well, and go back at a larger scale. Think about what we just said about the aerospace supply chain.
Right.
You've got Ball Aerospace over there making fantastic satellites. The technology is unbelievable. They're the mirrors on the James Webb Space Telescope, which is going to replace the Hubble, as an example.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, they didn't make all of those components and that stuff. It's all these other small companies. Well, how do they communicate? How do they make sure that the thing they're making meets the specs of the next person up the line, which fits in with the next person up the line, which is eventually gets put into a thing that Ball Aerospace is building? That kind of communications also goes down to the people level, but it goes to a company level too.
Right.
What's all this data flying back and forth, and how do we control it? How do we use it? And how do we protect it? So that's one of the key things we're worried about now is a concept called digital manufacturing and design, where companies won't handle a piece of paper. They won't be doing anything necessarily in some of the things where they have people now, for instance, ordering parts, just ordering supplies they need. With the information we've got, we can connect the designs, the manufacturing. We can find how much manufacturing is going on. We can look at inventory, and we can tie all that together and say, okay, we've got to put an order out for this big chunk of aluminum we need. And nobody's ever looked at it. Once we start talking about that, things are much more integrated. Integration brings strengths, but it also brings problems, like one little link in the chain can create a lot of problems. So we have to worry about communication at the people level and at the company level, particularly in something like an aerospace supply chain where you screw up and people get hurt. I mean, literally people get hurt. So that's part of what we're worried about now, is how to help companies with that connection to each other internally, their connections and that. So there's a lot going on.
I love that. And that's one of the things I feel like is not talked about a lot in the aerospace industry, right? As much as we have competing companies, Ball Aerospace and Lockheed Martin, they work together.
Sure.
So much on all of these things, right? There's a lot more behind the scenes collaboration than you would ever really think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, there has to be. There has to be. You know, and you're talking about, like with the companies we mentioned, you're talking about national resources. I mean, these are national assets. These are not companies that are just making something. These are things we depend on, you know, every day. I mean, GPS satellites, the weather satellites, getting them to space. You know, ULA, I don't know what their current number is, but I think it's 108 or 109 successful launches in a row.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we depend on all those things to happen right. And that happens because everybody down the line in a supply chain makes their thing happen right.
Absolutely. And because these crafts are all built all over, right? Several different companies touch them at any given time. Got to make sure everything's put in order and correct and follows all the lines. So I was told that you were my statistics guy here. You want to talk a little bit about how much manufacturing is directly involved in aerospace? I know we've touched on it for sure, but you got some numbers?
I don't. I'm not sure.
I'm sorry. Yeah. I didn't mean to put you on the spot there. Then.
No, but I can give you a bunch of numbers, and you nor anybody else would know whether or not I was telling the truth. So
that's fair. That's absolutely fair.
You know, I think, as I said before, I think we got maybe 500 aerospace companies. As we see in manufacturing, a lot of that aerospace is software.
Yeah.
You know, so there's an enormous number of software companies that are supporting aerospace now. In the defense supply chain, probably can double all that because there's a lot of companies who don't identify as being in aerospace or defense, as we talked about, who really are in the middle of that. So you know, the God, I forget the number for the aerospace manufacturing part. But Jay Lindell would have known. I apologize.
No, that's all right. I'm going to go with 16,000.
Okay, let's go with 16,000. Okay. And well, actually, if you read Douglas Adams, it's 42 is the answer to everything, right?
It is the answer to everything.
Yeah, yeah. And if you were a fan of the British pilots who fought the Battle of Britain, it's the higher the fewer. So, it's just aerospace trivia. There's
a bad pun.
Well, no, there was a. It's just a little funny thing. The question that a pilot would ask another pilot was, you know, how is a mouse when it spins? And the answer is the higher the fewer. Nobody knew what they were talking about or why, but how is a mouse when it spins? The higher the fewer.
The higher the fewer. Okay.
Yeah, so that's always a good answer too.
You know, I always have that made me think of when my mom always used to say, "I'll bet you $1 to a donut," and I never knew what that meant. But I always knew that she was going to win that bet, so I just never would bet against my mom.
Well, you know, there's a heck of a lot of those kind of phrases. Let's divert for a second. I'll tell you a funny thing. A number of years ago, I was working with a consulting company. I was doing some consulting in Oregon, and I was working with another company that had some students who had just graduated and were working and a couple of foreign students in there. They were working with me on this project, and so we were talking about a lot of stuff one day, and I always tried to help educate them in whatever they were doing, you know, and help them with their careers. And so I was laying out something that we were going to report, and one of the students said, "Yeah, I get all that, but what about?" And he asked a question, and I said, "Oh God, that's a $64,000 question," and I went on to explain why that was such an important component of what we're doing. I said, "Is that clear? I mean, have I explained everything to you?" And he says, "Well, just one more thing. How did you determine that it was $64,000? And what had occurred to me, not just with the students and foreign students, but even people every day, we just refer to things that we assume either it's an idiom or it's some colloquialism or it's something in our business. We assume that everybody gets that meaning. Exactly what we mean.
Right.
And it's so often that we don't. And the one thing I learned from a guy at the university I worked at 30 years ago was just ask the questions. Because I'm always standing up. I have no idea what you just said.
Yeah.
And we were at a meeting last week where a guy from the Department of Defense had an entire sentence that was acronyms.
Oh, my.
Honest to God. I'm not even joking.
Oh my God.
Except for the and a those kind of
OMG.
words. Yeah, OMG, LOL.
BRB.
The whole thing was acronyms, and so, again, to tie it back to things like aerospace and defense, there's so much of that is so internal to it
Right.
that anybody outside coming in, they've got a big learning curve. So, how do we get past some of those communications issues as well? So,
Absolutely. Well,
yeah.
and some of those are industry wide,
Right.
right? And then you always have the office talk, right?
Right.
Each company has their own on top of that.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm in the aviation industry. I'm a part-time flight attendant on the side, and so what's the one that these guys always talk about? CRM.
Yeah.
Is one of the ones that we have here, and for me, that's crew resource
Yeah.
management, right? And
That's the
so-
system you use.
Yeah, well, yeah, and that's if we have a threat, how are we going to take care of it? And
Right.
that's our crew resource management, and that is not at all
No.
what. So when I first started here, I was like, what are they talking about?
Yeah.
Do we come across a lot of fires and crash potential? So it threw me off for a while.
Well, and I was at one of our manufacturers last week, and I reached down to the floor and I picked up a drywall screw that was on the floor.
Yeah.
And I just said absentmindedly, yeah, I've always been a guy who's a fan of FOD, I mean.
Yeah.
Well, it's foreign object duty. It's picking stuff up off the runway and off the taxiway
Yeah.
to keep it from going on. But, they looked at me like I had two heads, which they should have. So kind of tie all this together, what we're talking about, communication and
Right.
aerospace and that. We're now unbelievably dependent on data and communication systems. And so what we're seeing then is we're really not paying attention to protecting all of that.
Right.
And it's really a threat. Communication just across people, communication across systems, communications between companies, and every one of those spots is a problem. It's a weakness in our chain of how we communicate information. And so aerospace, and we've seen this recently, is very vulnerable. Aerospace and defense are very vulnerable because they have so many people attacking them. And there's a lot more people attacking them than are trying to protect them.
What do you mean by attacking?
Cybersecurity, cyber
Okay,
threats.
right.
And that covers a lot of ground. And so what we do want to talk about in the second half is, okay, let's just get practical about what's going on with cybersecurity.
Right.
There's some very specific things that are coming down from the government that companies that may be listening have to worry about. But in general, there's just some things people have to worry about. Jennifer, we brought you along. A little bit of background to you. I asked Jennifer, what her background was, and she said, well, I had a security clearance to get in the Situation Room in the White House. I said, okay, we're done. But you worked for Henry Kissinger, and
Right.
yeah. So tell us a little bit about that part of your life.
Well, it was really my introduction to the whole idea of information security, and there was a lot of physical security, certainly as far as the Marines coming through at night, making sure that there was clean desk policy, something that we've kind of lost in many organizations today, the clean
Yeah.
desk policy. Everything had to be locked up or in the safe, locked drawers and everything. Then also some of the same security measures, similar control mechanisms like access control. How do you get into a system? Back then it was easier because you didn't have a fax machine, for example. You didn't have copier machines.
Right.
So that you could control the number of versions, the number of copies that were out there,
You had
and what
the copy,
versions
you had the
were, and so
paper
forth.
right there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was manual. So
And it was
you
numbered.
you had it or right, one of X. You had it or you didn't. Whereas nowadays, with one of the problems with, say, IP loss is that it's not really loss. You still have it, but you've shared it, and you don't
Oh.
necessarily know that you've shared it. And that's where the whole knowing what you have and being
Yeah.
able to detect any changes to what you have and so forth is so essential. And
Yeah.
it's a different way of thinking when you're talking about the digital world, and the digital world is increasingly connected to the physical world in terms of unlocking doors and so forth.
So we want to get more
we'll
into
be
this
right
on the
back.
other side.
It's a way to leave us on a cliffhanger. Stay with us here on Connect and Collaborate. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Connect and Collaborate. Again, I'm Alex Hopkins, your on-air producer, and today we have Tom Bugnitz from Manufacturer's Edge with us, and his guest is Jennifer Kurtz. She is the Cyber Program Director at Manufacturer's Edge, celebrating almost a 1-month anniversary there. So we were getting into a little bit of the background here, and we were talking about, the clean desk policy, right? And back in the day, it was easy. Everyone had to lock things up or shred papers, right, before they went home. And now we've got emails and lots of things that, sensitive information.
Yeah.
So true.
Yeah.
And back then it was, three write-ups by the Marines who came through to check, and you were out. Your job was over.
Wow.
And I think those are, and I'll tie this back to the current environment with respect to aerospace and all the manufacturers within that supply chain, is that often just having the policy in place that's actually enforced in terms of this is how you will use the organization's resources, this is what's allowed, this is what's not allowed. It's not always honored as well as it could be. Yeah. It's not always enforced well. And this can have a big consequence in the defense arena because of ITAR restrictions and so forth. So there are some...
What is ITAR?
I'm sorry, that's the International Trafficking and Arms Control.
Right.
Yeah,
okay.
And so there are a number of high, national security connected products, whether they're physical products or software products, that are protected. They can't be exported. And so there are limitations in terms of whether or not a foreign national, for example, can work on a given project.
Okay.
Because of the ITAR restrictions. There are restrictions around annual security training for those employees who work on an ITAR project, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And being in violation of that means that the company will not be paid for those work hours, basically, and could ultimately lose the contract.
Wow.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question.
Yes.
Related to what Jennifer was saying. Let's assume we're sitting here at Icosa Media, which is Cap Logistics and Connection.
Yeah.
Let's assume that there are attacks on Cap Logistics. And you've heard about China and Russia and everything else. Mm-hmm. Who would you think is the most dangerous person in terms of cybersecurity, or data breaches, or stealing your information, or stealing your bank account? Who's the most dangerous person in the world right now to Cap Logistics?
Cap Logistic employees?
You got it.
Yeah,
Yes.
I would imagine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because everything Jennifer talking about is human stuff.
Right.
And case in point, I mean, back in the day when I was on Kissinger's staff, one of my friends there with whom I worked was a young student, and she was going off to Yale the following year, and she and I went on a five-week trip in the Middle East. We came back to the FBI, having visited my parents' house, because she had asked me whether she could store a box at my parents' house, and my parents were fine with that. Turns out the box was full of confidential documents that she had taken out of the safe at the NSC staff. I mean, in this humongous walk-in safe.
Yeah.
And yep, it is so true. And just it happens today with IP, where you can have whether visiting or in-house staff where intellectual property is stolen, is sold, is shared unnecessarily. Mm-hmm. Boeing recently, was last year, had something where 36,000 employees' personal information was exposed. Yeah.
That's and I know we've run into a few of these things, right? Target had a huge breach, and we've had some high-power companies out there.
The F-35 program.
The F-35 program.
Yeah.
China has a airplane that looks just like the F-35.
Oh.
Coincidence?
Yeah.
I think
not. Not weird at all, because all along that supply chain, those plans are going back and forth. And okay, so I think one of the things we talk about is, I don't know, you've probably got a better number, Jennifer. Last one I saw was 83% of cyber attacks and breaches were because of something somebody inside the company did.
Wow. And it doesn't necessarily have to be intentional. It's not necessarily malicious. It can be ignorance, sloppiness. Mm-hmm.
Well,
it happens.
We're getting emails now that's, we're on Microsoft Office.
Yeah.
So you get these emails from the Microsoft Office support team at microsoftoffice.com. There's an issue with your login credentials, or you're about to run out of disk space, or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I've got my employees who've sent me emails and said, hey, Thomas, should I be worried about this? What do I do to get more disk space? And I said, well, let's take a look at this email. Have you noticed that the I in Microsoft is an upside down exclamation point? Okay, things like that.
Right.
It's totally phony, but for the average person in a 1,000-person company, one of them is going to go, oh my God, click.
Yeah.
And now they're in.
Exactly.
So that's one of the issues we want to address, is how do you train people to be paranoid?
Right, to be cognizant of it.
Just to ask, to assume nothing, just
exactly,
or assume there could be a problem and just question it. Right now we're getting into one of the prime seasons for phishing efforts, like as Tom was describing, because tax season.
Yeah.
And so IRS does not send you email messages.
Don't remind me. I haven't done my taxes yet.
They don't call you. They'll send you a letter.
Exactly.
And those are the kinds of things, like if you see it from IRS, people go,
yeah.
got to open it right away. Not.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I heard this one recently where they will call you and they will say that somebody's outside your door right now. They're going to arrest you, but if you go ahead and pay, we'll go ahead and tell them to stand down.
Yeah.
And as much as I would think that the average person wouldn't believe that, right? Go look out your front door. Millennials are falling for this. Normally you would think it would be an older, senior citizen who's just not used to that, and that sounds very fishy, and they don't want to get arrested. Let's go ahead and pay the fine, whatever. Right. But millennials are tending to fall for this, and that was shocking to me to find that out.
Yeah.
But I found that one to be a weird, and that one's not cybersecurity, but.
Well, then, and let's bring it back to manufacturing a little bit, even aerospace manufacturing. I've talked to companies recently about cybersecurity. Tom, it's just cheaper to pay the ransomware. Okay.
Oh.
But it always follows up with, and I've heard this a number of places, but you know what? Their customer service is fantastic.
Okay. They're really responsive.
They're very responsive. He says they call you up. They're courteous. They've got all the instructions we need. They know how to get the money from PayPal or whatever, buy this gift card or whatever. And they walk me through it, and they give me the code, and everything's back in it. It's cheap. $500 and I'm back. It's like, no. First of all, think about what you just said. But second, it's like saying the mugger was very polite to me when he stole my wallet.
Exactly.
But second, that's one of the issues we've got, is people think of ransomware as the threat. And that's the one about. It's, as you said, you lose your IP and you don't even know it.
Yeah.
Right. And with ransomware, I mean, the best protection against ransomware is to have good backups that you've actually tested too.
Right.
Because a lot of times people kind of check the box, kind of like the NSC did, checking the box as far as the clean desk policy, but not looking internally. And people check the box in terms of, we have a backup schedule, but have you tested your backup tapes? Have you tested your media? Is it
right?
Can you recover? And it's one of the kind of 5 areas that NIST advises us on, for all organizations, with a special concentration on manufacturing, at least from our perspective, is to identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. So those are the are the capabilities that you want to build in-house through having a good cybersecurity program. So not just policies, but a real program that's a living, breathing program, because it's not a one and done.
Well, I was at a company not too long ago who's inventing some manufacturing technology that would basically change a particular market. And that market now is controlled by China.
Wow.
Okay. So once knowledge of what they're doing as a product gets out, they're going to be a target. They don't think they are because they're a small company, making a product. No, they're going to be a target. So I talked to them, not just about ransomware, but I said, hey, just let's take a left turn from what we're talking about. What are you doing to protect all this stuff? What's your IT base? He said, everything's in the cloud. I said, okay. Like what? Well, like, all of our accounting and our design and all, blah. We use cloud service for everything. I said, okay, so yeah, they generally are worried about cybersecurity. How do you access that? Oh, we've got an internal wireless network on cable, like Comcast or Charter or whoever.
Right.
And I said, okay, so you have no security whatsoever, basically. And that's when I said, you have to worry about that because you are a target. You're going to be a target once that technology gets out. And the across the country, the lifespan of small companies who lose their intellectual property is 6 months.
Oh yeah.
Gone. Period. Gone. Yeah. And so people have to think about it, but it's one of 100 things they're thinking about, starting with how do I make payroll. How do I sell more product? And down here is how do I protect all my cyber stuff? But take that company who's making something that's going to revolutionize an industry. They've got to protect that. And what Jennifer mentioned before was NIST. Aerospace companies particularly have a requirement now that kicked into place
the end of
December 31st,
2017,
2017, which as far as we can tell, almost everybody ignored because very few of them knew it, was a requirement for something called 800-171. That's one of those things.
Yeah.
And, Jennifer, you're in the middle of that. You can explain what people are supposed to be doing.
Yeah, it's actually encouraging people to use IT assets wisely. And so the 800-171 requires that not only the prime contractors that do DoD work, that they complete these 110 controls, have a plan in place, have a strategy program, a cybersecurity strategy, but also have in place, clear action plan and milestones and so forth related to that, covering 110 different controls, of which there are 14 families of controls. And some of the things so many of them are totally logical, and they apply across all manufacturers, whether or not they're DoD connected. Yeah. And basically, as Tom mentioned, the enforcement hasn't been seen yet.
Right.
It's kind of like with HIPAA.
Yeah.
Enforcement didn't happen for a long time with certain privacy regulations until the HITECH Act was passed, several years after the initial HIPAA Act.
Yeah.
And then once hospitals were getting slammed with, a few $1 million here and there for fines, then people got more serious about it. And I think my gut is it's going to be the similar case within the manufacturing sector. And but even though it sounds daunting to have these 110 controls, like, where do I start? We might as well ignore it and maybe they won't find us.
Right.
But we're going to walk people through a very clear program of, first in 4-step, just first do a security assessment where you're identifying what is your inventory, what kind of IT assets do you have, are they vulnerable, which ones, prioritize those assets as far as if one of them goes down, do you go down? Because some of these IT protections can come into play in the physical world, where machines will go down if if they're violated, if they're breached, if there are problems. Document your system security plan and plans of action and milestones, and implement the controls, because it's great to have a plan, but you need to actually start working the plan. And then finally to maintain compliance. So a lot of it is around monitoring and making incremental changes in what you do, whether it has to do with employee background checks, access control procedures, the backup procedures, as I mentioned earlier, telecommuting for employees. If employees are sitting in a coffee shop and just online passing business-related documents or information, it's just wide open. Yeah. There are simple things you can do in terms of using VPNs and so forth, virtual private networks.
Thank you. I always appreciate the explanation. No, don't apologize.
Well, one of the things Jennifer's touching on is that if you got a contract with the Defense Department, you got to meet these standards. But anybody else who has a contract with you that supports that contract has to meet the standards too.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
when we talk about the 10-person firm that makes this part,
Yeah.
they've got to be just as compliant as Lockheed Martin on an F-35.
Right.
They're on the hook because you mentioned
Yeah.
Target earlier, the
Yeah.
Target break-in. That didn't happen at Target, even though Target ignored flags that, from their very expensive software that they had implemented to detect intrusions. But it came through an HVAC, an air conditioning company that was a contractor to them, and that's where the weakness was. So,
Right.
So Tom talked earlier about the interdependencies across manufacturing supply chains, and because of that interdependency, everybody has to be strong, or it's your weakest link.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and is it a stretch to say that the biggest victims of this would be the smaller companies? Correct.
Well, that's a good question.
Yeah.
That's a good question. Actually, I'm not sure about that, in the sense that I don't know how to answer that question, because they are
Right.
where I got confused thinking about the answer was these companies are all starting to get linked. I mean, if nothing else,
Right.
because they're all in the same internet, but they're sharing data and they're sending data back and forth. And so, on the one hand, they may be the most vulnerable and easiest to tap into.
Right.
On the other hand, if we talk about 83% of the stuff starts with a person,
Yeah.
if I got 5,000 people,
Yeah.
you know what? I'm going
I
to have a lot
gotcha.
of people who are clicking on those links and who are
Right.
so I think the the attacks are across the board. It doesn't make a difference how big you are.
Right.
But it's a really good question you ask. I don't know.
Well, and I suppose I was coming from, revenue lost, right?
Yeah.
When you have that security breach, the bigger the company, you're going to spend money to fix that breach. Right.
Yeah.
And so the smaller company, all of their profits are going to have to go to
Point
fix
taken.
that. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was where I was coming from.
Yeah.
These
If you
smaller
looked
ones.
at the percentage
Yeah.
of the company's sustainable funds,
Right.
they're yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's
They're working
another
operations.
goofy little statistic that talks about why smaller companies aren't taking care of this, and it's loosely connected, but it is connected.
Yeah.
In 250,000 manufacturing companies in the United States, 83% of them are sole proprietors or limited liability corporations.
Wow. Okay.
Okay, so what that means is
Yeah.
that if they go invest in a new piece of equipment, that money's coming out of their pocket. It's not shareholders. It's not a
Yeah.
big company like Apple with $250 billion in cash. They make a decision that is literally taken out of their pocket, and when they do their taxes at the end of the year, it's money that comes from that.
Right.
So I'm starting to think about $100,000 for cybersecurity, $100,000 for a new piece of equipment that's going to increase my ability to sell much more stuff, $100,000 for the new salesman.
Yeah.
Well, cybersecurity ends up down here. And
Yeah.
so then when something does happen, you're done.
Exactly.
You're
And
essentially done.
Yeah. And you're no longer
Yeah.
available to work at all.
Yeah.
Um,
That's a very good question. It's very
yeah,
perceptive.
I had to think about that one. I was like, I think that might be, they would be the most hurt in all of that. Are there any government incentives for the smaller companies to take care of? I mean, obviously they can lose out on contracts and things like that if they aren't up to code. But are there any government incentives out there that we know of, or is that something that might be on the future?
I don't know of anything other than what you said.
Yeah.
Like one of our big aerospace companies, after December 31st, was serious about this.
Yeah.
And I think they pared their number of suppliers down on their accepted supplier list from somewhere north of 10,000 to about 1,000.
Wow. That's
Now,
big.
not all of
Yeah.
those companies were supplying them stuff all the time.
Right.
But that's a company that is never again going to supply them. So the incentive is partly that reverse incentive
Yeah.
of I'm not going to lose a business. But I don't think there's specific government programs right now.
Well, except for what we're doing. I mean,
Yeah.
like through NIST and PTAC
Right.
and so forth, where there are subsidized programs, so government programs to subsidize training and awareness and doing the assessments for
Which
individual companies and
Yeah.
that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
I think that's where some of the
Okay.
government support comes from. It's kind of indirect. It's channeled through
Right.
through
Well, knowledge is
quasi-government
power,
groups.
right? And so when your company knows and they hear the statistics and they see, it might be $100,000 up front, but it's going to save me from losing my business later.
Or even what they can do themselves, because so much, I mean, a lot of it is just being aware and making little changes to the way you do things and the way you have employees consider what's coming in and what's going out and what the exposure is.
Right.
Because we're all an attack surface, basically. But a lot of there are so many free tools out there as well that companies can be taking advantage of. So,
one of the things Jennifer just alluded to was an assessment. And so that's one of the services we're providing now to manufacturers, which for the ones who want it, who care, we'll come in and do a free assessment. We'll take the NIST tools that help you there's a small business document that we can send out to anybody who wants it if they just contact us, that NIST has put together. It's cybersecurity for small businesses.
Yeah.
Part of that is an assessment that we'll come in and do for free.
That's awesome.
For a company just to go down the path,
Right. And the assessment really, it contributes to business resiliency because it becomes then foundational information for a business continuity planning document. It's foundational for possibly for insurance if you're looking at cyber insurance, so that you know what assets you want to have protected. And so it can lead to better IT practices in terms of standardizing systems so that technical support is smoother and less messy.
Right.
Basically.
We're also seeing, less messy. Not clean, but less messy. We're also seeing, Jennifer has said this a number of times in presentations that, good cybersecurity is good business.
Absolutely.
Well, we're also finding out that bad cybersecurity is bad business, and this is a minor example. Banks are starting to figure that out, not about themselves, but about the companies.
Right.
So banks are starting to say to companies, as part of their loan agreements, you better be compliant with 800-171. So what's your plan? What's it? Because they're recognizing that if I'm going to loan somebody money who's vulnerable to going out of business because of cybersecurity, I better make them pay attention to that. So I think in terms of the programs and things, Jennifer covered that pretty well. In terms of why companies are going to have to start paying attention to it, it's just not about cybersecurity. It's about keeping your business running.
Absolutely.
And keeping your financing stream going and keeping your customers in business and happy. It's just going to be a requirement. It's going to be cost of doing business. You got to have good cybersecurity or you're not going to be around.
Yeah. So for these these smaller companies that you can offer these free assessments to, where can they find you?
Let's talk the easy way. The website, manufacturersedge.com.
Right.
So that's got all of our contact information on there. They can there's a phone number there, and our main phone number goes right to me.
Oh.
Yeah, so that phone number goes to me, and because I don't know anything, I can get you to people that do. The second thing is my email is tbugnitz, T as in Tango, B Bravo, U, G Golf, N November I, T Tango, Z Zulu, at manufacturersedge.com, and Jennifer is J Kurtz, JKURTZ. We both end in TZ. I never noticed that before.
Nor I.
The more you know.
The more you know, the more you know.
There you go.
At manufacturersedge.com. We've got regional people all over the state that a lot of people know. So, anybody wants to get in contact with us about this, please feel free. We've taken this on as a mission that we've got to really get cybersecurity rolling in the state, in manufacturing. But also, let's pull together all these resources of cybersecurity in the state and figure out how we can just make Colorado one of the centers for, companies that are clean, companies that are doing cybersecurity very well.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you both so much for being here with us today, talking cybersecurity, which is very important to the aerospace industry, and it is on top of our Aerospace Week here at Connect and Collaborate. Tom, always a pleasure, and Jennifer, so nice to meet you. Thank you for coming in.
And Alex, again, thanks for Colbert and everything you guys do to support us, support Aerospace, support Aerospace Week.
Yeah.
You're a great partner for all of us, and we do appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Have a great day. We will see you tomorrow.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks.